The greatness of Caravaggio, the greatness of Shakespeare, the greatness of all the geniuses and masters of the arts is that they are able to launch messages that overcome time.
The ban of effeminate men and how fashion industry.
I'm fact.
In fact. Okay.
I am fact.
You are.
Yeah, because they're gonna rule the world very soon and I'm gonna be banned.
But regardless of how successful, well-known, well-established you could be, and you could be very far away in your career, it does not guarantee you enduring success in a stable position.
The real problem for me, and I want to know what you think about this, the real problem is that this... Actually, I need some lipstick. 1 second. Not lipstick, some Vaseline. 1 second. You will reach diversity as a side effect, a marvelous, beautiful side effect, if you will judge based on merit. Because merit will select the best, it will not select the privileged.
Amazing, right? These days we have to book an appointment to try some underwear.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
I buy only cheap underwear.
Well,
whenever I use it, not very often. Sociologists came to the conclusion that there is only one difference between a genius and a fool. That the genius has followers, the fool doesn't. What about I'm good at my job? What about that? Seriously. I mean, it's very funny. A friend of mine was sending me...
You don't have to be good anymore. You
don't have to be. You have to
be
identify. You don't have to be.
When they tried to bring some sort of a moral lesson to us, I think it cancels the actual joy of going and seeing art and enjoying any element of our culture. So, here we go.
Hello.
Shall we go through the list of themes for today?
Sure.
How we're going to entertain ourselves and our listeners. We're going to start with the biggest theme, which I guess shocked or maybe intrigued everyone in the world, with Bottega Veneta having a new creative director.
Yes. Actually, when I received the news of Bottega Veneta's director leaving, I was with you recording. It's just when we recorded our first episode, When we will speak about the latest rise of brand collaborations and the increasing number of successful stories which seem to be taking fashion, an idea of a brand, to a very different direction from what it used to be originally. We'll reflect on the recent exhibition of Hogarth in Europe at Tate Britain, which is currently on, and we will wrap up with a little chat about latest developments in Chinese government rule, and specifically on the ban of effeminate men and how fashion industry... I'm fact.
In fact. Okay.
I am fact.
You are.
Yeah, because they're gonna rule the world very soon and I'm gonna be banned.
Trip, I think it makes two of us. All right.
Yes.
Well, shall we begin?
Yes.
So, big news. Bottega Veneta has been super successful brand over the past years. The amount of this sort of a pleated baton, not exactly baton, but this square handbag all women around London been carrying around is inescapable. It's everywhere.
Yes.
And generally the whole new aesthetic, the rebranding, everything from logos to silhouettes, everyone has been replicating it. What Daniel Lee has done, he really turned the brand into something incredibly recognizable beyond handbags. Because if we look back 10 years ago, the brand was all about this sort of a pleated signature style handbags women in West London would carry around. But it had never been such a fashion statement and at the forefront of directing the trends.
Because it was aiming to be a rather than a fashion statement, a style statement. So the whole experiment of Bottega Veneta, since it was invented, I think, in 1967, thanks to Renzo Zengaro and another man. So two entrepreneurs. joined and created this amazing brand that created handbags essentially. And then they sold the company. The brand has appeared in memorable movies like American Gigolo. It was worn by Lauren Hatton. It was a very, very prominent brand. Then it had a very bad moment in the 90s, and since Kering rescued the brand, which was about to fail for bankruptcy, they have always wanted to empower the outstanding manufacturer of the bags and the leather products. So they didn't want to be a fashion brand. They wanted to be the epitome of understatement and luxury within the big house of Gucci, so that Gucci would be the fashion brand and Bottega the luxury brand. So keeping it small was actually part of the strategy, because you cannot be big if you are luxury. So and this is the idea that Thomas Meyer was following. So doing something, as you said, very understated for a woman that was not, it was sort of a younger version of Hermès, a woman that was not as mature, but also not as young. And then what you said with Daniel Lee, who really gave a different character to the brand.
Yeah, it almost became a super cool brand. And on one hand, it set a lot of trends and a lot of sort of shapes and designs and colors. But secondly, it also became a signifier of being aware of a fashion. It almost, in a way, I guess, turned into a little version of a Prada, being this particular segment in the market, which Prada is well known to be from.
Yeah. It's very. It remained Milanese in its core in many ways, which is like Prada, like Jill Sander, that sort of cipher of Milan. Also, I think the great intuition of Kering and of the CEO is that at the moment in which, when they hired Daniel Lee was coming from Phoebe Philo's team at Celine, and Celine lost its sort of its path, because when Slimane went at Celine, he brought a completely different style. So Celine, Celine's clients were left without a brand, and they understood that there was a gap in the market and filled the gap by calling somebody from the team of Phoebe Philo, and giving the market what the market was missing the most. And I think this was a very, very intelligent thing to do, and they did amazingly.
So this is why it's such a shock to hear what he's leaving the brand, considering you would imagine someone who had managed to bring such a breath of fresh air, new direction towards a brand which had nothing reflective of what it had become, would secure his role. And actually not so much anymore. We now have a new guy heading the house, Matthew Plazy, and probably his name came up in all the news I've been consuming more than anything over the last 2 weeks.
Yes. Yeah, he was already a prominent name in fashion. He worked with Margiela. He did something, actually, he worked at very high levels with Margiela, Maison Margiela. When Martin Margiela left the house, he worked with, obviously, also with the team of Phoebe Philo at Celine, but also with Raf Simons. And this because we think that what the brand is going for, obviously, we will not know this until February, when the first collection designed by Mathieu will be out, and Mathieu Blazy, but we know that it's what the brand is probably doing is that they are going for promote insider, aesthetic disruption, aesthetic continuity, the same thing that Chanel did with Virginie Viard. So promoted the insider, or the Alexander McQueen did with Sarah Burton. Mm-hmm. So promoting the insider and keeping continuity, because the brand doesn't need disruption at this point. However, my question is, the brand has always given us disruption throughout the latest collection. So maybe this is going to be the nth disruption. We don't know that. I thought about this, because the brand has been, like, they removed their Instagram account. That was a big disruption. They have held the fashion show shows behind closed doors. That was a disruption. They have been doing it bags when nobody else was doing it bags. That was also a disruption. Everybody was sort of exploiting shoes and trainers. They went back to the it bags. And one thing that is worthy of attention is the fact that when the old Bottega did not have a it bag like the other brands did, meaning that they did have famous bags, but their bags were unstructured and without logos. Now, all the it bags, think about the baguette by Fendi. Okay, structured and with a logo. They follow the opposite formula. So this has been also disrupted by the latest evolutions of the brand. So probably that's going to be interesting. But I tend to think that he's going to do a continuity rather than disruption.
I think you're absolutely right, because I was reading an article, and actually the brand CEO, he said what the storyline and narrative and vision of brand just will be re-established and continued. So that really the big question I have in mind. And you mentioned Alexander McQueen, Chanel.
Yeah.
We're not really having designers replacing these prominent names who bring their own creative vision. They're just picking up whatever the direction has been set and continue executing it, and actually often on an incredibly safe level, nothing daring. Since Alexander McQueen is gone, I haven't really seen the Alexander McQueen we knew while he was heading the brand. So actually, I would wonder, is the idea of this incredible vision and unique ability to translate idea and visual output, which we present to creative directors to have, could just be an illusion?
I think there's a difference there between the role of a stylista, which is a word that does not really have a proper translation in English, and a creative director. Now, if somebody goes to a brand that they didn't create and is asked to innovate without changing it, keeping continuity, that is creative direction. But a stylista does not have the problem of heritage, because usually he is the creator of the brand. So Alexander McQueen did not have to represent anybody's heritage because he was the creator of the brand. And when he went at Givenchy, they tried this experiment of Alexander McQueen as a creative director. It didn't really work. It didn't really function. He didn't stay. So there's a difference, I think, between people like McQueen and people like Galliano, who are pure creative directors, good creative directors. So there is, I think there is a difference in the DNA, in what makes them, So yes, this is one of the differences. But the real problem for me, and I want to know what you think about this, the real problem is that this, actually I need some lipstick. 1 second. No lipstick, some Vaseline. 1 second.
Okay, JP.
Pause.
You live in me on my own. You live in me alone.
I wanted to launch you an idea. Now, I think that now, in this conversation, we have been speaking a lot about designers. We've been saying all the designers are like this, creative directors are like that. But isn't this a fake narrative? Isn't the narrative that we are receiving from fashion just a fake narrative, in the sense that they are presenting these creative directors as geniuses, as people who single-handedly push fashion ahead? And that is because fashion needs to atone itself, and to think that is sort of almost like mimicking the structure of art. But does this situation not prove another point, namely that the creative director is a piece that the brand can actually supersede in favor of another piece, and the creative director is not necessary, and who is ultimately ruling and pushing the brand forward is the CEO of the company? Isn't this the demonstration that they made Daniel Lee when it was comfortable for them to make Daniel Lee? And within 1 year, Daniel Lee became the hottest designer in town. He won 4 awards at the British Fashion Award. At the British Fashion Award, he also won Best Designer. And then as the brand made him, they unmade him. They just fired him. And I heard all sorts of stories about this, which I cannot repeat. But essentially, my point is, if Daniel Lee was such a genius, if Daniel Lee was such a savior, if Daniel Lee was such a unique sort of demiurgic or godly figure, would it? So the story would have been different, I think. This is the demonstration that the narrative of the genius designer is a fake narrative, and the real narrative that nobody wants to talk about, but is a true one, is that actually brands are corporations, and they go ahead if there is a good CEO behind. This reestablished the power of the CEO.
Yeah, JP, I think, well, what is not fake, what is real in today's world. But absolutely, fashion is a business, as we know, and, well, the reality is something we know for sure, for a fact. It is turning more into corporate structure, and all brands embracing, especially with big groups, the idea what brand needs to function on hierarchical level. Profit is a priority, and as an outcome of that, yes, everyone in this game becomes replaceable figures, and you can absolutely, through your smoke and mirrors, ambience, create this vision of a little a creature who embraces the whole narrative and creates a beautiful product, creates this story which your consumers are buying. But in the end of the day, yes, absolutely. I think this highlighted to me more than anything the illusion of stability in a corporate world. And when off the record we were talking about what else is happening in our culture, we were discussing second season of Apple TV series The Morning Show.
Yeah, The Morning Show, yeah.
Obviously, they have a specific storyline which is going into it. But again, what it highlights really well, beyond Me Too movement on which the plot is focused, is also what, regardless of how successful, well-known, well-established you could be, and you could be very far away in your career, it does not guarantee you enduring success in a stable position. Things shift, and it's all about the narrative, the profit, and what is the best decision for, like you said, for the brand director to make. And if it requires to get a new creative director, so be it. And exactly this is
but that's the whole point. It's not if it requires, because it didn't require a new creative director. The brand is the only brand who grew when everybody else was losing. So it increased its profits during pandemic when everybody else was losing. So it didn't require it from a profit point of view. Clearly, there must be a different reason, of course. Probably. But one thing you quote there, and I totally agree with, which applies to Morning Show as well, which is the fact that we now live in a situation, mainly thanks to young people who very often complain about things that they don't fully understand, and oftentimes complain about things that they do understand. So it's a very complicated situation. But we live in a time that to some extent mirrors the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, the closer you were to being the emperor, the more your life was in danger. So your life was safer if you were not in power. The more in power you were, the more likely you were to be killed. So here we are in the same situation. The people in power are the ones who are more likely to get their heads chopped.
Yeah, I mean, we all know it very well from French Revolution times.
Yes.
But yeah, there is no real revolution happening. I guess this is
exactly.
This is the point. Creative director does not symbolize ultimate brand vision. It has been turned into another figure in a corporate game, really. And this is symbolizing it. Like, doesn't matter, is it Daniel, is it Matthew, whoever is doing this role, they will be able to continue.
Yeah.
So is the idea of creative visionary just an illusion in all these big corporate
businesses?
Exactly.
I read a long time ago, I read some studies on some sociological studies that try to understand what the difference is in a society between, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's interesting, what the difference is between genius and fool. And essentially some sociologists came to the conclusion that there is only one difference between a genius and a fool, that the genius has followers, the fool doesn't. It's not the quality of what they do that differs, but is just the fact that one is applauded by a crowd and the other one isn't.
And it is very easy for tables to be turned.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Oh, well, I mean, speaking of new innovative concepts and switching roles, the race of brand collaborations is super prominent, and it's getting to the wide spectrum of high street brands collaborating with luxury brands, which we have seen maybe for many years with brands such as H&M and different luxury houses. We see it with high streets such as Nike, sportswear, collaborating with luxury. But lately, it has been taken, I guess, to sort of a new dimension of this spectrum, with brands collaborating with each other, which you would assume to have similar customer profiles. Something from the recent ones was Balenciaga and Gucci. And even though this collaboration, which specifically caught my attention, could be a mix of high street and luxury, but still I would say it's probably premium underwear on a market segment. So it's Kim Kardashian underwear brand, and Fendi, Italian luxury designer brand. You know, Skims is priced as a premium underwear. Like it's probably not the most expensive. It's not La Perla, but it's definitely not your H&M underwear, not your Uniqlo underwear. So essentially it's very interesting how brands which have completely different backgrounds, probably even sort of a brand identity, and the way they visually communicate.
Yeah, think about Supreme and Louis Vuitton.
Yeah, very different. Yeah. They managed to find some common ground and present their latest product, and evidently from specifically Skims and Fendi, it's been super successful. I guess we also communicated super well. Online, it has been presented as a unique experience. You had to join the queue, you have to book an appointment to try it in person. Amazing, right? These days we have to book an appointment to try some underwear.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
I buy only cheap underwear.
Well,
whenever I use it, not very often.
Well, maybe you should try to consider some Skims underwear, which maybe it will encourage you to buy it every day.
If I have to make an effort, then La Perla would be.
Skims of Fendi. But yeah, I just find it logically mind-boggling how brands which have nothing in common to begin with manage to become successful collaborations. But also, what does it say about the whole business of building brand identity, creating some sort of a profile and visual narrative, when it can absolutely be mixed and diminished in this collaboration?
Yeah, and this, I think I have an idea about why this happens. Now, first of all, brands collaborations, as you mentioned, the most relevant ones, the Gucci and Balenciaga, although that is a very fake-ish collaboration because, I mean, in a way, because because Balenciaga and Gucci do belong to the same group, which is Kering, whereas much more interesting was the collaboration between Versace and Fendi because they do not belong to the same group. Also, I think that the big, sort of the big grandmothers of these collaborations was when, even though it's not a real collaboration, but somehow it's related, is when Donatella Versace modeled for Givenchy by Tisci. Do you remember that in 2015? She was the model in a campaign, in a Givenchy campaign. And that, to me, demonstrated what I believe about Donatella, that she is an extremely intelligent woman, which is often underestimated. And she demonstrated she's not just Gianni's sister. She's much more than that. And she's so confident that she's not afraid of measuring herself and collaborating with other brands, because she is confident about what she does at Versace. And this is the first thing, because she also did the collaboration with Fendi, where she really demonstrated that she is confident in what she does. The second thing that I think about collaborations, that it's sort of inscribed in a bigger picture, which is that brands today tend to pursue a path that is called self-disruption. Now, think about the first thing that new creative directors do when they go to a brand, to a new brand, when they work with a new brand, is either changing the logo, Tisci at Burberry, or changing the name of the brand. Celine by Slimane. Slimane, the first thing he did, he removed the accent from the E. Saint Laurent, he removed Yves, and he only wrote Saint Laurent. Burberry's at some point became Burberry, and also Balmain introduced a new logo, a horrible logo, and Maison Margiela, Martin Margiela became Maison Martin Margiela became Maison Margiela. So this is what self-disruption is about. It's giving the impression that you are not the old dusty brand, but giving of yourself the image of something dynamic that changes with time, that is never the same. You pretend to be new. It's like those old ladies who get or old men who get plastic surgery for looking younger. But if he succeeded, if the plastic surgery is successful, you have the amazing beauty of Cher, but if it's not successful, you've got monsters. So in some cases it succeeds, in some cases self-disruption doesn't. And self-disruption is important today for brands because we moved away from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and partly 90s idea of the total look, where you very recognizably had to wear one single designer. You were either a Versace woman or an Armani woman. Okay, it's very famous, this gossip that nobody knows whether it's true or not, but Armani once said that he was recalling this episode of Versace going to him and saying, the difference between us is that you dress sophisticated ladies, I dress whores. That's what apparently Versace said. Donatella says it's not true, but I don't know whether...
these days no one would admit.
Of course, these days no one... But it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, because it captures the essence of total look. One was creating clothes for a sexually liberated woman. The other one was dressing women who did not find their liberation in sex, but in work. So, and those women wanted to identify with one style. We are not there anymore. This is not the era of designers. This is the era of stylists. And your look should be created of differences, all put together. And that's exactly what you see in Balenciaga and Gucci. Sometimes the individual pieces don't even look like they are designed by the same designer. That's also a self-disruption thing. And that is because the way in which millennials and Z generation consume is very different from baby boomers. Baby boomers followed brands. Millennials and Z generation don't follow a brand because of its name and prestige. They follow values, and therefore they don't want to get attached to a single style. So I think the collaborations disrupt the monolithic idea of a brand and give this impression of variety and newness.
I also wonder if by collaborating and creating this illusion of newness, because it's not really anything which is truly new, but could it be this idea which perceived to be new, creating different perception of actual brands once they're separated? So suddenly collaboration becomes something illusionary, like a possible vision. And always collaborations were very short-lived. Sometimes we even get sold out in one day. So it almost feels like it never happened. And suddenly when you look at the brands separately, they feel more real because their story continues and collaboration is over. So maybe this is another way for brands to reestablish their significance in the market for participating in the fleeting moments of participation. So I also thought maybe this helps brands to find their identity today, saying we are relevant, we can reinvent ourselves, but we also stay true to our identity, even if it's completely made up.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, yes. Also, it was amazing, especially in Fendi and Versace, how the two brands, you could see both of them in the collaboration. You could see Fendi in Versace and Versace in Fendi. It was very interesting. It was a very interesting experiment. A little bit less successful to me was the Balenciaga and Gucci, because Gucci really went hardcore using Balenciaga, whereas I did not see that Balenciaga was really doing the same with Gucci.
Yeah, I think
it was much more tame.
But also both brands, they, like you said, they belong to the same group. To some extent, they have an element of grotesque in both of them. So probably it's very difficult to make very unique statement when both brands have such a vibrant character. Whereas when you collaborate with street style, or maybe even, I mean, you mentioned Fendi and Versace, probably they both are quite bold as well. But I think mostly collaborations, they are between almost platforms or high street or maybe mass market, and then other segments such as luxury. Maybe because they're so different, it enables both of them to have a different level of output expression in the clothing design, and therefore it appeals to different consumer, because suddenly brand which we consider to be traditional, old-fashioned or not innovative participates in something which is very, very closely connected to different consumer market. And when it suddenly pulls back because this collaboration is over super limited, it also probably creates the illusion of this exclusivity and probably contemporary moment of us wanting to participate in whatever's the latest. And obviously it's ongoing narrative on fashion. We want the latest. We don't want anything that was relevant yesterday. Even today is already going by. We want to be relevant tomorrow. And probably this moment of collaboration is actually the perfect embodiment of being relevant just for the current moment, and tomorrow we have another collaboration, so we don't have to really create anything enduring. We just need to create moments which just enough to capture our attention for today, and then we move on.
Yeah, totally. It's very interesting how I obviously agree completely with what you say, but it's very interesting how even though brands want to be relevant today and they live in the moment, and fashion is ultimately about today, is a radicalized idea of the present more than it is about the future. Fashion is about the present and the immediate future, not the distant future. But notwithstanding this, brands are trapped in the past, and that's the other reason why collaborations are the last resource, because on the one hand they want to be relevant today, on the other hand, creatively speaking, they don't know what to invent anymore. So collaborations are a new idea of introducing something new, innovative, without having to create.
I recently went and saw a new exhibition at Tate Britain, Hogarth and Europe. This exhibition probably a little bit deceiving in its title to begin with. I actually noticed this is something Tate Britain is really good at. We had an exhibition of Manet maybe 3 years ago, and actually there probably were like 5 or 6 Manet paintings, and everything else was sort of his contemporaries, so other artists inspired by his work. So William Hogarth is 18th century British painter who had a very specific segment of his work. Obviously, like any other painter at that time, he done a lot of portraiture because this is how painters would make money. But a lot of his work was satirical, ironic commentary on the society values of that time, and probably sort of a transgressive behaviors which led society nowhere in a way. But again, carefully, what I didn't realize, the second title of the exhibition saying Hogarth and the Europe meant with the paintings by many painters from Europe, and that was interesting. I guess it's nice to see.
Sorry, what do you mean? You mean that together with Hogarth,
there were like many more painters.
Right,
so
right, right.
Because you would imagine it his solo exhibition from the way it's titled, and this is what Tate Britain does quite often. I think they lure you into buying a ticket thinking, this is what I'm gonna see, but actually no, it covers something else. Because I think last time we did Monet, it was something Monet in London. So again, every time you see an exhibition title saying there's something else, well, expect it to be watered down by other artworks. Not that it is a bad thing. Maybe sometimes it's super handy to reflect on art, not only focusing on one artist, but on his contemporaries and other aspects of the moment when he was living. So what puzzled me a little bit in this exhibition, more than the fact that it was not his solo exhibition, is the way it was curated and communicated. So the exhibition starts with general introduction to his work, and then saying what the actual exhibition aim is to analyze, show us the work, but also criticize it. And I do wonder, is the actual purpose of exhibition is to criticize, especially not contemporary art. This is art from 1700s. There's very little we can do to really change what was produced so many years ago. And when the exhibition progresses, obviously 18th century was time of immense development of British Empire, and with all outcomes, yes, you will have elements of a lot of materials and art objects and lifestyle objects brought from all over the world, which are being used as decorative pieces in people who could afford it. And I guess, just like today, a lot of things we buy probably made in China does not mean that we have very specific narrative which we communicate when we buy these objects. But I felt exhibition was trying to emphasize how many great products were brought to the British Empire as an outcome of the slavery trade, and also trade of tobacco, sugar, tea, cotton, and anything else we could import and export. So in a way, I felt this whole exhibition did not focus on necessary just showing us the work of Hogarth or his contemporaries in 18th century. It was trying to give us a very, very specific moral lesson on how people used to live their life. And it's a bit ironic because Hogarth, in a way, making these satirical comments in his work, and then at the same time Tate Britain as an art institution also making a lot of moral comments. So I felt like I was being schooled a little bit on the ethics of 18th century, which...
No, that's the whole point. If that was the thing, it could have been a great thing. You were being lectured using the 17th century, the 18th century, you were being lectured about today's morality. That shouldn't be done.
Well, but this is
that's the problem, is projecting our current morality onto the past. If it was criticizing his work with inscribing it within the morals of his own time, then perfect, fine. That could be something enlightening. The problem is when you apply today's morality to the past, expecting that the past had, and wondering how's it possible that they didn't have the same values that we have today. So what if the future historians will judge us with the same criteria? That is terrible.
Yeah, exactly. This is something which concerns me the most. Every time I look in the past, even let's say 10 years ago, I think for all of us it is super easy to say, oh, like this is immoral, or why would someone do it? Even if it's not a negative context, we still judge it from modern perspective. And in a way, I believe to understand something from the past, good or bad, enlightening or just pure entertaining, well, it doesn't one doesn't cancel another, but we have to distance ourselves in a way from contemporary moment and almost project ourselves into the time in whichever event, art, fashion was produced, and then try to understand how it would have been seen, understood, and perceived by people who lived at the time when this was actually happening. And then, even though we could find it challenging, because look, I guess it's very difficult to understand completely what it was like to live in 18th century, but we can at least try to picture ourselves in that time. And when looking at artwork, I'm not sure we necessarily always need to bring out moral judgments and critique.
We never should. I'm not sure. We never should bring morality into judgment, because that's not the point with art. You see, Caravaggio, arguably one of the most important painters of all times, who had the misfortune of being born in a time in which with which we don't share many values. Okay, Caravaggio was a terrible person. By their own standards, he was terrible because he was a homosexual. By our standards, he was terrible because he killed a man. Okay, so we are not judging whether Caravaggio was morally a good person. It doesn't matter, because what he changed doesn't have anything to do with morality. What he changed was he taught the world, he gave the world a new perspective on how to represent reality or how to represent things. That's the value. You should not look for values that he was not conveying into his work. So Lewis Carroll was a pedophile. Everybody knows that. It's not that we are, because we read his books and Alice in Wonderland, then we are excusing his behaviors, which remain abhorrent and appalling, but his book remains a great book. So his story remains a great story. So that's the thing. Morality is different. That's my problem. Mixing the good with the beautiful. They're not the same thing.
But again, the exhibition was not focusing on giving... Well, there was a little bit of a moral judgment towards values and ideas of Hogarth, but it was more about the actual painting's depiction analysis, which I felt was shifting from technique or maybe arrangement, composition, narrative towards social hierarchy, meanings, oppression, trade.
Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. We have been talking a few minutes now about Hogarth, and we didn't mention anything about the way in which he represents and what he innovates. We have always been talking about the society of his time, when art is art, not when it really represents the contingencies of the history, but when it's able to go past the contingencies of history. So we are narrowing all that we could say about a great artist. We are narrowing it to almost as if he was a documentarist. Almost if that's the one thing that was great about him. It's like Caravaggio. It's like removing from Caravaggio all the work he did on light and on choosing completely innovative models and reducing it to representing the time in which he lived. That's not the point. The greatness of Caravaggio, the greatness of Shakespeare, the greatness of all the geniuses and masters of the arts is that they are able to launch messages that overcome time. So it's not, their value is not to be found in the documentaristic approach to their own reality, but to their ability to convey messages that once stripped off of their contingencies and their own reality, they still signify something broader and bigger. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually think it's a shame because maybe Hogarth wasn't the most technical painter, but he depicted a lot of scenes of contemporary life, fashion and interiors. And I felt like because of the way exhibition was curated and communicated, I didn't pay enough of attention to beautiful embroideries on dresses where sitters in his paintings would wear. I didn't look at interiors from the perspective of what was the aesthetics, the style, the symbolism of that time. But I thought, all these objects were imported from this slave trade and that slave trade. I felt the narrative of the experience of an exhibition shifted from actual understanding of 18th century, not only from societal perspective, but also through aesthetic and visual part, because look, art is super visual, our culture is incredibly visual. I felt it has taken it to some sort of identity politics narrative again, rather than actually talking about pure art and visual symbolism, not necessary teaching us a particular lesson. I guess it's a very, very challenging time, and it's not only like one art institution. I think it translates into fashion, into education, into art. It's everywhere. There's some sort of a message that's being communicated. Even just off topic, I heard of a recent advertisement for Metropolitan Police, and it's not saying about what sort of career you can get there or the benefit of being part of a community. It's all or helping the community. It's all about identities of individual Met officers who work there, and we all present them like, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm gay. And it's kind of reductive of what this job is about, and actually,
What about I'm good at my job? What about that? Seriously, I mean, it's very funny. A friend of mine was sending me.
You don't have to be good anymore. You
don't have to be. You have to be identify. You don't have to be good. You have to be either a woman or homosexual. So I had recently. A job offer was sent to me, and it was like my friend said, "Look at this; it's interesting." And it was an interesting position, but they were, and essentially the bottom line is that as a homosexual, I would have had more easy access to the job. And then I thought, hold on a minute, I've never been discriminated in any job on the basis of my sexual orientation. Nobody asked me. Nobody cared.
It's not Caravaggio times anymore.
So I have an advantage in London. I mean, I'm talking about London. I'm not talking about Afghanistan. I have an advantage, but I over somebody else. But I did never have suffered to find a job based on that. Maybe based on, I don't know, other things. Yes, I have other disadvantages, like for instance the fact that the English is not my first language, and I'm not British. That's my disadvantage if I have to point at something, but not my sexual orientation. So there is no point in giving me an advantage for that, given that this has never been a disadvantage. Does it make sense? But now everything is reduced to that, not because it helps me, but because it makes them look good.
Yeah, but also it does not really highlight the sense of unity. I think it actually, if anything else, it kind of says what you have to identify by default to be able to function these days, and it reduces the idea of having unity and working towards common good or improving the processes we have in place.
Yeah.
And I think this is something which especially public services such as police should be about. It's about finding the best common ground of how our society can function, rather than saying they have quotas for particular type of employees within their portfolio.
So here's my challenge. Obviously.
Is it for me?
No, not for you, for society, because I think we agree on this. I suspect. Obviously, I do want that everybody has the same opportunities of, I do believe in equality of opportunity. Of course, not equality of outcome, but for many reasons.
What about equality of effort?
Exactly, equality of opportunities, and then you make this all the same effort in order to...
Yeah, but I think also, the element, the opportunity should be equal to everyone, but also... everyone puts different effort into the opportunity they are given. I think this is also the aspect we forget about. Because some people really try super hard. They make a lot of effort. They really want to make some difference. They want to develop something. Regardless, it could be something grandiose and it could be on their local level. But I guess if we reduce it only to opportunity, it does not let individuals who actually want to put more effort to be recognized as well.
Yeah, my point is that we should make everything possible to remove any sort of problems or any hindrances, any obstacles to anyone accessing whatever their personal characteristics are, accessing a job. Of course, without expecting that this generates an equality of outcomes. Necessarily, okay, but for many reasons that probably we don't have now time to but we can dedicate a segment to this equality of outcomes and equality of opportunity. My point is though that you will reach diversity as a side effect, a marvelous, beautiful side effect, if you will judge based on merit, because merit will select the best, will not select the privileged, and the best are split, I guess, equally pretty much in every culture, pretty much in every gender, pretty much in every orientation, in every race. So they will emerge naturally if you put merit at the very at the very center of your quest, rather than identities. Because otherwise, you will have people who are hired because of their identity and people who are hired because they're good. And your employer will always see this difference, and that will not benefit any minority. That will only benefit the people who were hired for merit.
Well, speaking of representation, identities, and to some extent minorities, which probably not such a minority in the country we're going to talk about, but so recently we read a fashion article about the ban of effeminate men in China. This is part of a new direction law which emerged earlier this autumn. So it's not like a new news in the essence of what it has been communicated to society. But now probably is the time when fashion taking its time to try to unravel for ourselves what it's going to mean and how it will reflect brand communications, directions, and image.
Mm-hmm. So yes, they have banned effeminate men, especially some celebrities, like a boy. I think they criticize males who use too much makeup, and they sort of banned a boy who wore some rabbit ears in a Instagram video, the usual things that we have been seeing from certain countries. So it doesn't surprise me that much. It saddens me, it doesn't surprise me. What surprised me was another thing, was the reaction of the West to this sort of news. That really surprised me, because on the one hand, because I didn't see all these uprisings, especially in fashion brands. Fashion brands did not complain about this, or even the media, such as, for instance, Diet Prada. I didn't see barricades and critiques and critical pieces about this very repressive law in China. What I saw, though, was that a couple of weeks ago in Italy there has been a law. It was called the DDL ZAN, a law that has been rejected by the Senate of the country, because essentially it was a law that punished with heavier sort of sentences people who attacked individuals for their sexual orientation and for other reasons as well, not only sexual orientation and gender identity. The law didn't pass, but it didn't pass because our senators are necessarily homophobic or transphobic. Some of them are, of course, but you find them everywhere. But the majority of them did not want the law because the law was very badly written, extremely badly written, and it opened for the introduction of categories in the Italian system that do not exist yet, because they are very new, so they could not be, they shouldn't be introduced so quickly into law, and also because there were unsolved issues of freedom of speech. Now, the point is, obviously, it's a very important law that should be made at some point, but I wish for a law that is well written, okay, and that puts together the entire parliament, not just the left, for instance, which, as it was in this case. Now, I'm bringing this up because after this law has been rejected by the Senate, all the influencers have spoken about it. Chiara Ferragni, a lot, Pierpaolo Piccioli, Alessandro Michele, and even Diet Prada dedicated a post, a very grim, catastrophic post. But missing the point, because hold on a minute. Yes, this law didn't pass, but this does not mean that you cannot be a trans or a homosexual in Italy. You can even marry or at least create civil partnerships. If you are a transsexual, you can change sex since 1981, I believe. So with a very good law, by the way. So it's not that you are endangered if you are a homosexual, but the overall narrative was that it was dangerous to be a homosexual in Italy, which is absolutely not the case, because you cannot be attacked in the street for any reason. Okay, not for any reason. So, notwithstanding, the narrative was extremely catastrophic. But in comparison to China, that was nothing. So I didn't see the same barricades being made with about the Chinese situation, and that was very, very indicative, I think, of how people, activists, and especially fashion brands, weirdly on the same side, are moving. Okay, they criticize what is criticizable. This is not revolution. The revolution is not to criticize what you can criticize. It's to criticize what you should not criticize. And this demonstrates how phony, in some cases, their approach to these issues are, as if the identity questions were only relevant in the West, but they are not relevant in China. They can happen there. We will not talk about it. And the funny thing that I found extremely fascinating is that the Chinese government said to the media, you should avoid portraying effeminate men, and you should, they said sissy men, the word was sissy men, the translation of the word sissy, and you should go for more Chinese traditional males. And I was like, hold on a minute, but was the Communist Party not precisely destroying tradition in favor of revolution? Was a cultural revolution not precisely wiping tradition away and wiping hierarchies and old sort of aristocracy? They even wiped away great tradition like the tradition of waving silk in China and other similar things. And now you want to reestablish tradition only for gender roles. Isn't this a little bit counter-revolutionary, sort of the opposite of what you have been doing until now, isn't that?
Yeah, it's a little bit kind of counterintuitive. They're saying they want to promote traditional masculine aesthetic, simultaneously embracing new socialist values, and we even say advanced values. It all does not make sense, and I also think it questions bigger part of the whole Asian market overall, which is probably influenced by K-pop and the idea of visual aesthetics of that genre. It's super specific. I guess it could be described as this effeminate man. So when is China trying also to kind of neglect the huge influence Korea has on their visual culture and pop influence as well? It's, I guess, something similar which happened with video game ban, which they put like new restrictions on how long people can play video games for. So trying to control society in a different ways, which I don't know if they're even controllable at this point, because it's so widely acceptable, so available, and you can still find this content everywhere, to what extent you can really challenge that. And then, absolutely what you're saying about how West is presenting China as an example is very particular. And I guess I could relate to this coming from Russia. It is very similar. Yeah. Everything which happens across the border, on the other side of the world, is almost painted in this very wide brush strokes of being good and bad, people having no freedom, no opportunities. And of course, there are a lot of limitations, but I think it's also very much about how you present it. And probably even this law, maybe it's not that dramatic. It's probably just government narrative, which were communicated in China as some sort of ideal and aspiration. But I imagine a lot of young people will probably don't even register it as much. It's probably more or less the same. I think here, potentially, we are jumping on this narrative more because it enables us to impose itself as the lead free world establishment, which gives people an opportunity to have any identity, whereas everywhere in the world you will be limited. And to some extent, maybe these news are presented to us in a way to just reestablish values here and saying whatever we have in the West is the best mode of operation, as just as it is regarded. But is it like this? I guess we probably often have very, very blurred ideas about what is actual situation in other countries, because we don't live there and we could probably never understand, and we have this very specific on the surface ideas.
I completely hear what you're saying. Yes. I still don't understand why we are so ready to judge our own past with today's morality, but we are not. The same people who would judge our past with our current moralities refrain from judging distant countries with our own values within the same time. In the same time, that's very peculiar. And I'm not saying it's wrong, because I do think that you should apply relative sort of judgments. You cannot judge everything by a single standard, of course. But why is the historical thing different? After all, is the past not just a different country in many ways? So the two things about the museums and this, I think, link somehow. I always wonder why in certain countries, like Russia, we were talking about Russia last time and China this time, and so we have great friends abroad, I suppose. Like that we will be attacked by very soon. No, I wonder why. I wonder why these countries are not. They are progressing from the point of view of finance and economy, and we have always believed in the West that liberalism is what empowers the individual and makes the economy grow, and they are managing very well to empower the economy without empowering the individual, which is very peculiar. So I wonder why this, and I think my answer is that these countries are so big and so diverse that the only way to maintain the current power is to be somehow very controlling and very repressive, and to limit any individual inclination, because the power needs to be imposed from above equally to everyone. That's my explanation. I don't know if I am wrong, but yeah.
I mean, the future will tell.
I mean, you should know.
I think what you're saying is quite applicable to Russia. I haven't lived in China, wouldn't know that. But yes, Russia is huge, very diverse, difficult to apply some sort of unique rules to each region, because when it causes a lot of corruption and inequalities, so when you have this sort of top level very rigid control system, I guess it enables country to function in maybe not in the best way, but at least to function. And yes, this is why they probably go for this mode. But something which I also took away from this article about effeminate man is how China is saying what vulgar influences and celebrities should not be allowed on media. And I thought, what a funny word to use, vulgar. It's so subjective. What is vulgar to one person, what is vulgar to another? To some, the actual government could be super vulgar. So I think it again opens this conversation about how the rules, regulations, and especially government trying to control social media, trying to control entertainment industry. It's a little bit of a losing game to begin with, because entertainment in a way it's supposed to be vulgar, because this is a popular culture, and you're trying to bring some sort of a high culture and moral values into the most common source of society, joy. You're not gonna impose these new standards, because entertainment requires some sort of ability to actually appeal to a wide range of people, and it does not have to be complicated, because the moment it gets complicated, it requires very different approach to the consumption of any media information. So in a way I feel any government could even if we have any laws here which try to, or even art exhibitions, to bring back the Hogarth experience, when they try to bring some sort of a moral lesson to us, I think it cancels the actual joy of going and seeing art and enjoying any element of our culture, because we see it as an entertainment, and when we're being schooled during trying to experience entertainment, it's not pleasurable anymore, and therefore it becomes something else.
Yeah. It's very interesting what you're mentioning about the vulgar being very subjective. First of all, let's not forget that the word vulgar comes from vulgus, which is the people. So it means popular, essentially. Even Italian, so the evolution of Latin was called, by Dante, was called the vulgar language, because it was the language of the people. So vulgar is not necessarily a bad word. We should reconsider vulgarity. God bless vulgarity. Anyhow, it sort of echoes the idea of, for instance, trigger warnings in the West, and also this sort of rejection of anything that is offensive in the West. There should be laws like for instance, the hate speech laws often punish offensive sort of speech. Hold on a minute. Isn't it the same thing, though, as vulgarity for China? What you're saying is offense not very deeply individual. So something you say could offend me just because it doesn't meet my system of values. So there isn't a single way of assessing offense, because offense is different from everyone. I'm an atheist, and I'm offended when people think that certain things are sins. And I am aware that my saying that I'm an atheist and I do not believe in any God offends, for instance, Catholics. So isn't offense something deeply personal? You cannot prevent offense, because offense is inbuilt in the freedom of speech. I have the freedom to offend you. I do have it because it's in my freedom of speech. Having said that, my right to offend you does not equal my duty to offend you. I believe I have a right to offend. I don't believe I have the duty to offend, and I will never intentionally do it. But it's important that the law allows me to, because of what you were saying, because it's personal, like vulgarity. In the same way, I want the right to be vulgar, and I think I'm succeeding at it.
I think it's a sin to deprive people from the opportunity to express their thoughts, ideas freely, and project their vulgarity as much as we'd like to.
Yes, vulgarity. Forever and ever. That's why I love Donatella.